My guest today is Justin Kenna, CEO of GameSquare, the company behind FaZe Clan, Code Red, Stream Hatchet, and a growing portfolio of gaming and esport assets. Justin has led one of the most interesting consolidation plays in the space, bringing creators, data analytics, brand partnerships, and competitive esports under one roof. So with that, how are you doing today, Justin?
I'm good, Chad. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Let's dive in. Let's get started here. Very curious for the audience to know about your origin story and then how that shifted into kind of being a pioneer in esports.
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny one. I actually I grew up playing traditional sport. Wasn't a huge gamer. My sister used to beat me at Mario Kart and Duck Hunt. And so I wasn't a huge gamer growing up. It was actually interesting. I'm Australian, as you can probably tell from my accent. But I've been in the States for nearly I think 12 going on 12 years now. And I was running finance and strategy for a company, and as you know, Chad, the gaming space has really evolved into new media, right? And such a huge part of that is content. And I was actually introduced to the guys at FaZe Clan when I was living in LA. I mean, this is sort of 8 to 10 years ago now. It's crazy how time has flown by, and really, I wasn't looking to leave the company I was at, but I saw such a big opportunity. Right, FaZe had this enormous following, and at the time, they were in esports, but they had these content creators and they had this enormous audience. They didn't really have a business, and it was just really interesting to me. The more research I did, and just saw how large this space was, how large the audience was, I was excited by it. And so, yeah, I really got involved by taking a role at FaZe Clan. I was the CFO there for a number of years and became the chief investment officer. Raised close to $60 million in debt and equity at my time at FaZe, and I think really helped pave the way in terms of um, commercial deals in the space. Really, that crossover and that integration of gaming into pop culture. I think many of your audience will be aware, Chad, of sort of the partnerships that FaZe did, with traditional sports stars and entertainment brands that I think other gaming orgs have really opened the door for. But yeah, my entry point into esports was certainly through FaZe Clan, and it's been a wild ride, and it's been certainly a lot of education, and I have a huge amount of respect for the space, and I'm really bullish about where the space is headed.
That's great. And speaking back to like the intro, you guys are definitely this conglomerate of a variety of different complementary assets. So you guys again own FaZe, Code Red, Stream Hatchet. What's the operating thesis that kind of ties these all together?
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution because I left Phase really understanding so much more about the space, and our thesis was beyond esports, and really that gaming more broadly is the consumer economy of the future, right? This creator economy that's evolved out of gaming has been so interesting. And really, the thesis of GameSquare is connecting game publishers and brands with these huge and growing audiences, being gaming and esports fans. The video game market has a $230 billion TAM, right? Being a $230 billion total addressable market. Around 60 to 65% of that revenue comes from the creator economy. And so, really, GameSquare is this end to end model that's helping connect game publishers and brands with these huge and growing audiences. I think part of what people don't talk about enough is yes, these are really large audiences, but they're really fragmented and they're really hard to reach. And so we've built out this model. We have four major streams within our business. I'd say from an end-to-end standpoint, we really don't have a competitor. We certainly do, within those four streams. One is our technology streams, so data and analytics. You mentioned Stream Hatchet. And Stream Hatchet, really, for those that aren't as familiar, what Nielsen is to broadcast television is what Stream Hatchet is to the gaming and streaming world. We have 9 of the top 10 global game publishers as clients and really are the de facto market leader when it comes to data and analytics. We have a creative business, Click, which we have north of 80 talent under management there, and we're in the process of launching our creative deployment business. Our third stream is our full service agency, so we work with Epic Games, Roblox, big publishers, as well as brands. We work closely with Jack in the Box, Dairy Max, Top Golf, Paramount, and other top tier brands through our creative and strategy team, merchant, consumer product, media, etc. It's a full service agency, and then our final stream is our owned and operated IP, which really FaZe Esports sits under.
That's amazing. Yeah, what you guys have done to date is extremely impressive. So that kind of going back to one of the, I guess you'd say, most famous brand assets that you guys have, which is FaZe. There was a bit of some noise in the market in December here earlier with a lot of the big content creators like Swag, Apex, and Rug departing. So can you walk us through a little bit ultimately what led to that, and how will the content creator side of your business evolve?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the part of that I can. I think that, I think a lot of people are a little confused by the sort of structure that sat behind FaZe. So we acquired FaZe Clan. We split FaZe Clan into 2 assets, being FaZe Esports and FaZe Media. FaZe Media being the creator side. We actually divested that. We sold it back to Banks and to Matt Kalish, who's one of the founders of DraftKings. And so we don't have any ownership of FaZe Media any longer. So really, I think the news that many people saw sort of play out over social media, we did as well. We didn't have a front row seat to that. We weren't privy to exactly what went on. I think ultimately, my understanding is that there was sort of dispute over contracts in terms of FaZe were paying for a number of the creators, whether it be rent and editing and security and internet and all of these things, and we're trying to sort of negotiate contracts to get a split and get a return on investment, which I'm sure most people would think is reasonable, and they couldn't get to terms. And that's ultimately, my understanding of the situation. Again, I don't want to comment on that too much because I wasn't a part of those conversations, and a lot of that is secondhand information. So it didn't, I would say, besides sort of some confusion around ownership and questions that we received, it didn't really affect us. FaZe Esports, has now operated separately from FaZe Media for some time. Certainly, I've got great relationships with the founders, with Matt Kalish, with a number of the creators that we're still in contact with. So, I'm a huge fan of FaZe, the brand, and certainly am excited to see whatever Matt and the team do with it next. But yeah, I think beyond that, it's really not my position to comment on it too much, other than to say that, from an esports perspective, we're incredibly excited about, where FaZe sits within the ecosystem, some of our growth plans that we have in place, and certainly, around the longevity of the FaZe brand within the esports ecosystem.
That's really interesting. I wasn't actually aware of that split, so that's cool to know, and provides, I think, really great context too for those who are also uninformed. So speaking again about the esport asset specifically, then, so what esport teams or FaZe teams specifically are active today?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think many people would know Counter Strike. I mean, it's what FaZe is really known for, Counter Strike and Call of Duty. So we're active today. Rainbow Six, Smash, Apex Legends, PUBG, and we may re-enter Fortnite.
Okay.
Um, we're always looking, right, at what makes the most sense. I would say for us, our priorities right now are really Counter Strike, Rainbow Six, and Call of Duty. Um, I think we're embedded in those communities, which
Mhm.
performance and winning helps, but also, I think you need to understand your communities and invest in them and create content and events, and I think we've done that well to this point, but I think there's some exciting stuff to come. Can't give away too much, but I'd say we're going to be investing in those ecosystems considerably, over the next sort of 12, 18 months.
Would you be able to comment, and if you can't, that's fine, but would you be able to comment on what you kind of see the vision for FaZe as a competitive brand over the next, let's say, I don't
Yeah,
know, 3 to 5
yeah.
years or?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, not trying to be too cryptic. We're a public company, so there's certain things that I can
Yep.
touch on and not. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, it is. It's funny, and Chad, you would know this better than anybody. There's a lot of, I think, misconception out there around esports winters and things like that. We feel really bullish about esports more broadly. I think the numbers reflect that. I think there's some natural growing pains that happen, right? And we can kind of touch on some of those, and where I think there's areas for growth and improvement of further collaboration with publishers and the ecosystem maturing overall. But I think there's been a natural kind of evolution of consolidation in the space. But I think, yeah, for us, we're gonna continue to invest in the space. I would say finding the right balance with new games to enter, but certainly a focus on Counter Strike, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six, investing in those communities and spaces. I think for us, winning, getting back to winning is key, and we plan to do so over the next 3 to 5 years. And again, I think that's part of the investment thesis, right? Is getting the right rosters together. Um, I think it is fan engagement, continuing to find ways to really engage with our fans on a deeper scale, events, content. Um, yeah, we're certainly really excited and bullish about that. I think something that I can't probably give too much away on, but something that we're certainly exploring is the academy route on the Counter
Mhm.
Strike side. I think, I mean, if you take a look at the numbers around Counter Strike, it's incredibly impressive, and certainly I think franks the fact that we're really bullish about that space, and obviously we have very deep roots there. So that's probably a few things I think we're focused on. I think our team's done a really good job of obviously we had the split from sort of the FaZe core brand, and so creating those standalone FaZe esports channels, right? Instead of back in the day, everything sat under the FaZe main channels, which had an enormous following, but you had a percentage of that audience that didn't care as much about esports, and they were following the large creators. So to spin off those channels, and I think what kind of Reader and the content team have done is incredibly impressive. If you have a look at the content that we're creating on FaZe Esports standalone, YouTube is amazing. The engagement is increasing, and we're going to continue to double down there.
That's great insight. Thanks, Justin. And that I keep grilling you a little bit about the FaZe stuff, just because it's obviously close to home and just really interesting point of topic as well. But so I guess talking a little bit more from the GameSquare perspective. So can you talk to me about how GameSquare approaches the esports and gaming space differently than other like big public companies that you'd be compared most to, like Overactive Media or Enthusiasts? And what do you see as the winning formula?
Yeah, yeah. I'll focus more on what we do. I think
Sure.
that. look, I think there's certainly challenges within the esports space. So
Mhm.
when I say I don't think that we're in an esports winter, I think I can say that from a position of we have built out other revenue verticals, right? And so I certainly do think if you're a standalone esports org that might not have the brand or following of a FaZe Clan, there's certainly challenges. And so, yeah, I think for me, in just as a little bit of history, we originally acquired Complexity, and I think when we acquired Complexity, we did a really good job in coming in and helping sign creators to the brand, in helping drive an agency and brand funnel, in having data in house, in having a media offering, and I just think that those revenue verticals give you such a huge leg up, right? Because all of those pieces are so incredibly important to growing audience, growing fandom, and ultimately being able to sign brand partners and keep those brand partners happy, service them in a way that you're actually providing value, right? And that's through eyeballs, that's through engagement. So, when we saw the opportunity to bring FaZe into the group, obviously we divested Complexity and acquired FaZe, and part of that, again, being that FaZe had access to a larger audience. And so I think the GameSquare model gives us an enormous leg up, right, when it comes to the esports space. And I think it's sort of a flywheel approach where GameSquare benefits FaZe Esports and FaZe Esports benefits GameSquare. And I'll start on the FaZe Esports benefiting GameSquare part. That is largely because um, it's hard to be a gaming business or agency that's trying to connect with audience if you don't understand that audience. Like, owning an esports org gives us access to audience. It gives us authenticity, and I think that gives us a huge leg up in understanding our audience and understanding our consumer. When it comes to the other way around, how does GameSquare benefit FaZe Esports? Well, again, Chad, the things that I mentioned, I think having a built-in commercial team that's out there and talking to brands helps, right? I think having a content studio that can follow the team around, create content, be there for a lot of the out of tournament opportunities, to have an agency team that can come up with strategies around fan engagement, to have a live events and experiential team, again, similar merchant consumer products, and the list goes on. So, we are still only what was it, 18 months into the FaZe transaction. It's pretty early, really, and I think we're hitting our strides. I think there's a lot of exciting things to come over the next few years. As I said, we're really bullish on the space, but I think having those expertise in house certainly gives us a big advantage when it comes to the space.
Interesting. And that is definitely one of your guys' unique selling propositions as well, and definitely big differentiator from a lot of the other esport orgs as well. So again, kind of talked a little bit about revenue there, and esports has sometimes been notorious for definitely can be sometimes challenging on that respect. But where do you see kind of some of the next major revenue opportunities from the industry kind of show up, and what do you think scares brands about esports today? What do you think can maybe remove some of that friction?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think that yeah, part of what scares brands is probably that education piece. I think that endemic brands who understand the space and the audience continue to get bang for buck, right? When it comes to sponsorships of esports, teams, events, whatever it might be. I think the challenge is a lot of these non-endemic brands are focusing on the creator space. I think, again, if I touch on GameSquare, that sort of works for us because we can integrate creators into esports. And I think there's a huge opportunity within that. I think something that's really interesting is that half 50% of the eyeballs within major esports tournaments last year were actually through creator channels rather than through the main broadcast. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity instead of separating the two and looking at it from a competitive landscape, i.e., the creator influencer space is a competitor to esports. I think building out a strategy that integrates the two is a successful one. And I think ultimately you can drive a lot more value for your brand partners through doing that, through integrating them organically. I think that's a big opportunity. Look, the reality is that the publisher piece is still really interesting in that you just have such different approaches from different publishers in the space, right? And I think if you look at the Counter-Strike ecosystem, it's one that other publishers should look at and learn from, right? And that's collaborating with your teams and orgs. It's greater rev share into tournaments, into in-game digital items. And so there's certainly challenges there, Chad, that I think ultimately, if you want longevity within your game, you want to have a competitive esports landscape that's garnering real eyeballs. And so I think publishers could certainly learn from that Counter-Strike ecosystem, and hopefully we'll see more of that and more of the sort of open league opportunities. But yeah, I think that look, brand partnerships is certainly a way to continue to grow and scale. But I think you're spot on in saying that there's been some horror stories for brands that are new to the space coming in and ultimately not getting great delivery and execution. So I think it is for sort of owners and operators out there of esports orgs, it's not some big bright shiny toy. It's really consistency in execution. It's being realistic with your brand partners around what you can deliver. And I think if you can do that, and if you can integrate in creators, and you can make sure that brands have expectation around what they're going to receive, your consistency in delivery, then you'll have long-term brand partners. Then you can get strategic, and you can invest in your rosters, you can invest in content. But certainly I think it's the revenue opportunities need to be far greater than just prize money and tournaments and the bricks and mortar of esports. And you really need to be at the forefront of content and fan engagement and unlocking those other revenue verticals.
Interesting. And I think that makes sense. That was a great answer, Justin. So speaking on a little bit on the technology side, with all of the, it seems like weekly almost all of the crazy things about AI. Is there any like specific technology shifts that you're most excited about? And if so, can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting in general. I think esports as people think of gaming and esports in comparison to traditional sports, I mean, incredibly well positioned for technological advances, and in some ways have really always been at the forefront there. I think there's a lot of opportunities with the evolution of AI, and I mean, we're seeing that more so probably on the more casual gamer front and the ways that we can engage brands and deliver for brands. I'd say on the esports front, maybe less so technological advances, but again, I think what excites me is really just the growth and the numbers behind what's happening. I think what's happening over in the Middle East with the investment into the Esports World Cup, and now
Right.
I don't know, Chad, how closely you've been following the Nations Cup and the dollars that are going in there.
I see some of those prize pools are astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, winning some of those would certainly help, wouldn't it? But you can see the investment there, and we are seeing prize pools get larger more broadly. And I think we are seeing partnership, with traditional sports teams and leagues. We are seeing, co-streams with some of the biggest creators in the world. That's what excites me probably more so than technological advances. I think, again, going back to where are the eyeballs? I mean, the eyeballs are, co-streaming through Jinxie. They're Tim the Tatman's watch parties of, the Counter-Strike major at the Esports World Cup. And so I just think that there's a lot of opportunity through content and new media, that, people think, esports is in sort of some level of maturity. I mean, we are such early days, Chad, to all of this. We're just scraping the barrel. And I mean, again, we're really bullish on the future of the space, and certainly from a FaZe Esports perspective, we're going to be allocating resources. We're going to be investing in the space pretty heavily over the coming years.
That's great. I'm going to bring it back a little bit to earlier. You said you were kind of investing in three primarily leagues: Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, and Rainbow Six. So speaking on a little bit of the franchised esport leagues, how do you see them kind of evolving over the next, let's say 3 to 5 years? And what are some of the biggest, structural or business challenges? Because definitely when I had my stint in esports on the early days, I'm sure let's say the Call of Duty, franchise league has evolved a lot since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, from my sort of personal viewpoint, certainly without trying to be controversial or aimed at any one publisher, to me, I mentioned it before. I think publishers should look at the Counter-Strike ecosystem. I think it's the best template for game publishers to copy. I think that publishers should look to open up their ecosystems. I think that more third-party organizers need to be involved. I think greater collaborations with teams needs to happen. The gaming and esports world is already so fragmented. I think we've seen some improvement there, but I think Overwatch was certainly a big lesson and learning curve. But for me, I think that there's certainly some profitable franchise structures out there, mostly in Asia, but generally, people aren't getting returns on those investments. I think that there's been, people trying to mimic traditional sports, whereas esports is very different, right? Like
Right.
The reality is, in traditional sports, you've had these geographical, you've got these cities that have had, supporters and loyal fan bases for years. I think in gaming, it's very different to that, right? We live in a digital global world. I don't think that fans have as big an affinity to a city or a location. And honestly, with that, I think provides more opportunity. And so, for me, I'm an enormous believer in the open ecosystem. I'm a very big fan of the way the Counter-Strike ecosystem operates, and I think that there's a lot of learnings to take from that. Again, I think that there's been some improvement in this space, but if you look at traditional sport, owners of traditional sports teams they're already making money from media rights alone. Like that doesn't exist within the esports ecosystem from a team ownership standpoint. I think that publishers really need to assess, do I want to be in esports? I would think that you do, right? I think it's only positive for the longevity of your game and your title and your updates. I think that if you decide that you want to be in esports, then invest in it. Like talk to your team owners. You're only going to be successful if they are. And again, I think that the Counter-Strike ecosystem does it well in terms of the way that they share in-game digital items. The open ecosystem, I think, works. I think that's, again, without trying to be too pointed, that's sort of my my opinion on kind of open league versus closed league stance.
Interesting. My next question, kind of going back a little bit to the technology changing rapidly, and kind of with AI, and you see like XAI with what they're doing with their game, game studio that they're currently building. Do you see like a future where creators at FaZe or the FaZe brand itself creates potentially games or products like that instead of just kind of more sponsorship type deals where you guys could be making your own games or something of that nature?
Yeah, look, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting one. I think for FaZe, you know, FaZe FaZe is a brand, right? Which I think is um, it gives a big leg up over some of the other esports orgs, which frankly they are esports orgs, but they're not necessarily a brand, right? They don't have the same audience, and the logo may not be as recognized. And so I think there's some advantages to that within certainly within merchant consumer products and the ability to license that logo and partner with the Ghost Energy can, the deal that FaZe had a few years ago. The numbers around the can with the FaZe logo on it were astonishing. So there's lots of opportunities around growing the brand from a sort of publisher game developer standpoint. At this stage, I'd say the answer is no. It's certainly I think that there are some opportunities, certainly with the evolution, and I'll touch on that in a moment. Um, I think to develop a game is costly and time consuming, and that's not necessarily the business that we're in. But I would say like the evolution of Unreal Engine and what Epic's done with Fortnite's really interesting, right? Like I think our agency business, this isn't FaZe per se, but our agency business has certainly taken advantage of the opportunity to build out maps in game for big creators or for brands, right? Launching new products. We helped integrate Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles into Fortnite. We now co-own the IP for SpongeBob with Paramount, and we're creating, that IP in game. And so that's really exciting. And I certainly think there's more opportunities for creators to get involved in that space with the evolution of things like Unreal Engine and becoming the platform rather than just the game. But from a sort of a game development standpoint, I wouldn't say that's a priority, on the FaZe Esports side at this stage.
That's fair. And to your point, AAA development is they got to get a handle on that because 500 million plus to make some of these games is quite quite a demand, and you're seeing some of these AA studios with a 50 million $100 million budget blow some of that away. So we gotta definitely in North America we gotta figure out how to get some of that number and bloat down. So we have a few more questions here. So talking a little bit about kind of the ecosystem of esports, do you expect esports consolidation to kind of accelerate or slow down over the next, let's say 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it'll continue for sure. I think it's healthy. I think it's, again, I think that there was a misconception coming out of COVID that esports has been in this winter. And again, if you look at the data and analytics around the space, that's not the case. I think there's challenges around the different ecosystems and the monetization piece. But I think the reality was going into we're in COVID and at one point esports was the only sport that was live, right? And you had all of these new eyeballs and all these new brands in the space. But I think with that came some pretty unrealistic valuations on companies,
A little bit.
on esports orgs. That really the fundamentals of those companies really never justified. And so I think the esports winter was overplayed in the same way that there were valuations that were never justified. And so with that, I think that there were down rounds from a valuation and investment standpoint. There was bad taste in people's mouths because there was some dumb money coming into the space. And so I think it's been, I think I think the consolidation that has happened has made sense. I think it will continue to. Um, and again, I think that getting to scale in this space is important. For all the reasons that I spoke about in terms of sort of the GameSquare model and ecosystem and why I think that makes sense. And so I think consolidation makes sense. I think it will continue. I don't know if it'll necessarily accelerate. It will slow down, obviously at a point of growth, and that'll be a great day for everybody. But I think it will continue. And look, I think things like the Esports World Cup, in some ways are, really encouraging consolidation, right? Like the reality is a lot of these esports orgs, while they look at it and go, wow, $75 million of prize money, very few of them are actually competing for that, right? Like,
Right.
Falcons have done a great job from a performance standpoint. So, I think that there are esports orgs looking at that club championship pool and thinking, hey, if we join forces and become one org, here's a big prize pool we can go after. And there's other examples of that. So, yeah, I certainly think it'll continue, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's healthy for the space and will continue to grow and evolve. So, yeah, I actually think it's a positive.
So if you think that if there will be continued consolidation, in your opinion, what kind of companies, get acquired first or fail?
So, sorry, in terms of what companies
Like
get
what? Yeah,
acquired.
yeah. Like for continued consolidation, like what are kind of some of the criterias that you would kind of think that are primed to get acquired versus are just going to fall off to the side and be forgotten as
Yeah,
collateral
well,
damage?
yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I think the reality is, if it's a pure esports play, they really need to be complementary because,
Yeah.
and rightfully so, you can't own, two teams in a league, right?
Right.
And to be really transparent, Chad, I loved complexity. We really, we didn't want to divest complexity, and originally we were looking at, can we keep complexity and phase and make it work? And we had some different ideas on how we would position the brands and do that. But ultimately, both of those brands are really born out of Counter Strike, and a lot of the identity of those, esports entities would die if they weren't a part of Counter Strike. So look, I think they need to be complementary. I think there's a lot of opportunity into new markets. Again, if you look at games that are big in Asia, or aren't necessarily big in Eastern Europe, aren't necessarily big in North America, and the list goes on. So I think there's opportunities there geographically to consolidate that makes sense. And then I think, Chad, it is, sort of looking outside of esports, right? Like
Mhm.
looking at these creative businesses, looking at these agency businesses. How do we integrate creators into our strategy? How do we build a bigger brand funnel? How can we service brands outside of just pure, jersey sponsorships and so forth? Because I think, the reality is that the consumer now doesn't want to just watch, right? They want to be a part of it, and I think having a strategy that can help engage fans, interact with fans, is going to be incredibly important for longevity. So, a bit of a long-winded answer. I think for me personally, we've done a number of different acquisitions. Right now we've done a huge amount of work to get to profitability, to get debt free, and we're certainly not going back there. So I'm not, I'm only looking at assets that are accretive, and we're just not going to take on anything that's burning cash anymore. Um, I think for me, um, it's a little different, I think, because FaZe Esports is our esports brand, so we're not really looking to acquire other teams or orgs in the esports space. We'll certainly look to enter new games, but again, we would do that under the FaZe Esports banner. I do think there's some certain interesting partnerships or licensing opportunities into new markets. I mentioned into Asia and China, into the Middle East. So that's a bit of a watch this space. But yeah, that's our thesis. I mean, our thesis is how do we continue to build out our end-to-end model? We're looking at assets in sort of new technology. We're looking at assets in media distribution. We're looking at assets in performance marketing. But all of these areas that I think, again, ultimately are helping us, drive more eyeballs and drive performance for our brand partners.
That's great. That was a great answer. Thank you, Justin. So last question. I know I've kept you here, but last question. What advice would you give to executives or founders who want to build, a sustainable business in esports?
That's a great question, and we probably need to do that over a drink. I think.
I agree.
I would say that you need to go into it with eyes wide open. That you need to go into it with an understanding that this is not a quick fix or a quick return, right? I think that was part of the challenge that's happened is some of that dumb money that came into the space was sort of thinking, hey, there's these huge returns. We've got to be in gaming and esports. This is the new sports. And they didn't understand enough about the ecosystem. And the reality is, if you look at NFL owners, they weren't making money for a long time. This space needs time to evolve and mature and consolidate. So I think it's going in with eyes wide open. It is, I would go in and really plan out what your strategy is, how you can differentiate, what are your other revenue verticals, what's your plan to deliver brand value, what games do you want to be in, why. You have a real purpose, but have a real purpose with a long-term view. And so, you're certainly going to need capital to do that. So yeah, I think if you think that this is a space that you're going to get a quick return because it is a new, fun, fast-growing industry, it's certainly not the case. But I do think there's real long-term value and long-term returns here. So yeah, if you can partner with the right people, build out your very specific, purpose-driven strategy, then I think it is an exciting space, right? So yeah, I think it's just going in with eyes wide open, making sure that you have a real understanding of the space and you've got a plan.
That's great. Great answers to date. Amazing insight. Again, thank you so much for sitting down and sharing with me today. And it's been a pleasure, Justin. Truly appreciate it.
No worries, Chad. Thanks for having me.